This video is brought to you by Raycon. Welcome back to the channel, folks, and welcome to your summer semester here at the Royal Ocean Film Society. I hope you're all doing well and are staying safe and healthy as the world slowly begins to reopen. We're well into the month of May, and that means that it's not only the best time of the year, but that it's my personal favorite time of the year. The way that 97% of all women obsess and swoon over all things autumn and fall is basically how I am about the summertime. Beaches, fireworks, summer beers, lake days, cookouts, road trips, Texas summer sunsets. I would gladly take 100 degrees Fahrenheit any day over 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and I have a channel called the Royal Ocean Film Society. What do you really expect? Now, for me, as I'm sure it is for you, the summertime always involves a lot of trips to the movie theater. But, well, you know. So today I want to do something a little bit different, a little bit more relaxed. I am going to program a series of films for you, all based on that overdramatic love that I have for the summer. Each of the following are glorious summer films that I just want to live inside of. Also, this is maybe, hopefully, possibly a series of films that you may not be familiar with. So no Jaws, Sandlot, Dazed and Confused, Point Break, all good stuff, but I'm going for something a little bit less popular. Anyway, without further ado. First up, from 1953, it's the sublime seaside comedy, Mr. Hulot's Holiday, because I'm not going to attempt to pronounce its original French title. If you've hung around my channel for a little while, you'll know that I am a die-hard fan of Jacques Tati's films. And if you haven't seen any of his movies, I think that this is actually the best place to start.
Monsieur... Hein? Comment? Vous permettez. Hulot.
It isn't necessarily his best film, or even his funniest film, but it's the easiest and most pleasant of his films. It's really closer to a hangout movie more than anything else.
Mr. Hulot!
Mr. Hulot, as the title suggests, goes on holiday to a seaside resort, and antics ensue.
Une chaleur! Tu ne peux pas savoir.
And that's about it. It has the thinnest of plots, there aren't really any stakes to the story, there's no antagonist, there's no moral, there's no message, and yet the whole thing is just completely delightful through and through. Watching it is like stepping into a postcard, or one of those French travel posters people hang on their wall. If ever there was a movie that I wanted to live inside of, it's this one for darn sure.
Mr. Hulot, I'm going. I've had such a good time. Goodbye.
It's odd. Mr. Hulot's Holiday was a huge success when it was released, and I imagine that Tati got a lot of offers to do a number of other similarly titled movies with the character. Like Chaplin's Little Tramp or Peter Sellers' Inspector Clouseau, you could pretty easily conceive of a whole series of misadventures. Mr. Hulot goes to college, Mr. Hulot falls in love, Mr. Hulot goes to America, Mr. Hulot solves a murder, Mr. Hulot's wartime years, Mr. Hulot goes to seminary, Mr. Hulot wins the lottery, and so on and so on. But Tati, of course, didn't do any of that. And for the remainder of his films, Hulot increasingly became less and less the main character, and more just another part of the background. And I admire that, don't get me wrong. Hulot, like any other character, could have eventually outstayed his welcome as a result of too many films. But I have to admit that there's a part of me that kind of wishes he'd made more.
Permesso? Permesso? Dammi Avanti?
If there's a Mount Rushmore of film directors, Billy Wilder is on it without a doubt. You probably know him best from this,
Shut up and deal.
this,
Nobody's perfect.
and definitely this.
Isn't it delicious?
But I'd like to submit for your consideration one of his last films, and arguably his last 5-star masterpiece, Avanti. This one stars, you guessed it, Jack Lemmon in what was the 5th of their 7 total collaborations. His character here flies to the gorgeous Gulf of Naples to arrange for the return of his recently deceased father's body back to the US. However, complications arise when he discovers that his father died alongside his long-term and up till now totally secret mistress, whose daughter is also here to collect her mother's body.
As for your mother, she ought to be ashamed of herself.
My mother had nothing to be ashamed of.
Oh, no, she was a perfect lady. Meets a rich elderly American in the lobby. 1 hour later, she's having drinks with him in the bar. 2 hours later, she moves her things into his suite, and then...
Actually, they didn't meet in the lobby. They met in the souvenir shop buying postcards.
What the hell difference does it make?
Like so many of Wilder's films, Avanti has this hardened and even somewhat harsh outer exterior, but a soft, gooey, lovely sentimentality at the center. And the best of his films prove just how much of a master he was at balancing those two elements, at managing the nuance between them. Avanti is no exception. Strangely, to me at least, this had a fairly muted response when it was released back in 1972, but I would happily put this among the list of his best films. Although, to be fair, that is a long list.
I've got to get a train to Naples and a boat to Ischia, and if you guys give me a bad time, if there is the slightest hitch, if I don't get him back to Baltimore in time for that funeral on Tuesday, there's going to be such a scandal.
Full disclosure, this is also a pretty new film for me. I saw it for the first time earlier this year, knowing pretty much nothing about it other than that it was a film of Billy Wilder's. But that's one of the great joys of being a film fan or a movie buff or cinephile or any of those other dumb words people use. Just when you think you've seen it all, you stumble onto something you didn't even know existed that knocks you for the best kind of loop. So a couple of summers ago, I did a video on the questionable beach party films of the 1960s. They were some of the first Hollywood films specifically made for and marketed towards teenagers, and in general were a very odd spot or blemish on the film industry's not too distant past. I got a lot of comments in that video asking which film in the series was the best to start with. Hands down, the answer is this one, Beach Blanket Bingo. This was the fifth, the best, and most importantly, the least embarrassing entry in American International Pictures' official Beach Party series. It's goofy and campy, and it's really kind of stupid, but it's also kind of fun, and that's what matters. Approach this like you would the 1960s Batman TV show, and you'll have a pretty good time.
That's the name of the, that's the name of the, that's the name of the game.
Thankfully, this was also the most self-aware of the series. There's a good bit where Don Rickles roasts Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello for playing teenage characters while looking, well, just listen.
You two 43-year-old yo-yo skipping around the house. Grow up! You're a man already, Frank. How long can you stand in the bathroom in front of the mirror go, Saba, Saba? You're 43, Frank. You're old and wrinkled.
Perhaps most importantly of all, though, is that Beach Blanket Bingo features the one and only, the man himself, Buster Keaton. This was surely his finest hour. As oxymoronical as it may sound, my next pick is what you could label the mature beach party film, although it isn't technically a beach party film. Both the 1959 Sandra Dee starring Gidget and my next pick, Where the Boys Are, released in 1960, were successful teen films with a beach setting that AIP kinda sorta ripped off for their own series. But where those films are extreme on the camp factor, Where the Boys Are is a relatively straightforward, serious drama. Historically speaking, this was coming in after the ridiculous juvenile delinquent films and squeaky clean television shows of the 1950s, but before the drug culture and sexual revolution of the later 1960s. And in that respect, it sits on this really interesting fence between the two. Four college freshmen head down to Fort Lauderdale for their spring vacation, where the beaches are insanely crowded. The guy who played the Riddler is a pretentious jazz nerd.
Next is an original of my own, written for guitar and flute, entitled A Meeting Between Shakespeare and Satchel Paige on Hampstead Heath.
And Connie Francis can't seem to find a date.
Well, let's not be insulting.
Also, yes, this is technically a spring break film, not a summer film. I am breaking the rules, and it won't be the last time that I cheat on this list.
Now take sex.
What?
I said take sex.
That little three-letter word is very much at the center of the film, but it isn't treated in a flippant way like most teen comedies, including the beach party films, typically treat it, but nor is it like some Reefer Madness after-school special. What it is honest and balanced. The reality, as the characters in the film experience, is that courtship and sex can sometimes be a very dangerous game. This is a slight spoiler, but if I'm not mistaken, this was one of the first mainstream Hollywood films to deal with the reality of date rape. This was not only an honest film that wasn't afraid to deal with taboo subjects, but it's one that painted its characters as smart and skillful, but also messy and confused in that way that most 18 and 19-year-olds typically are. And because of that, the characters here feel so well-rounded.
When I spoke to her on the phone, she suggested that you might be overly concerned with the problem of sex.
I'd say there were probably 500 million co-eds in this country. I imagine 98% of them are overly concerned with that problem. So in that respect, I guess I'm fairly normal.
I don't want all that to make it sound more dour than it really is, though, because this movie is such a good time. It's got this wonderfully pitched comic tone, occasionally campy, but not overblown.
Now take sex. I don't know how you feel about this.
Hey! Did you see that? A double shooting star!
The dialogue is surprisingly sharp, and almost all of the performances are really well judged. Paula Prentiss is maybe the best of the bunch, but that may have just as much to do with the fact that she's got one of those voices that you could just listen to all day long.
You know what I wish? I wish I could come back to Lauderdale. At least twice, that's what I wish. I certainly enjoyed myself today. Thank you.
Also, Dolores Hart, who plays the main character Merritt, actually ended up leaving Hollywood just a few years after this movie came out to become a nun. Which has nothing to do with this movie or this video, I just think it's interesting, and kinda cool. Anyway, moving on. Next up is maybe one of the most picturesque movies ever made. From 1959, it's the classic Black Orpheus. Cue the music. Black Orpheus is a reinterpretation of the old Greek myth about the musician Orpheus who falls in love at first sight with Eurydice, who just so happens to unfortunately be running away from a shadowy costumed figure that's basically just death incarnate. All of this is set in gorgeous Rio de Janeiro as the city prepares for the annual carnival celebration held before the season of Lent. And yes, just as with Where the Boys Are, I'm cheating by including what's technically a springtime film in a summer series. What are you gonna do?
É verdade que você pode fazer nascer o sol tocando violão?
Ora se posso!
Viu? Não te disse? Você pode fazer o sol se levantar amanhã?
Mas é claro, ainda mais que amanhã é dia de carnaval.
This movie is so much fun. It has this completely dazzling and intoxicating effect. The music, the color, the costumes, the dancing, it's one of those movies that's impossible to not get swept up in. Like Mr. Hulot's Holiday, watching it is like stepping inside a decades-old postcard. The tone of the movie may take a bit to adjust to, and part of what I really mean by that is that Orpheus and Eurydice pretty much completely fall head over heels in love at first sight, and it's one of those things that you kinda just gotta go with. The movie has much more of a classical kind of feel, almost like an opera or a ballet. That may have just completely turned some of you off from watching this, but I'd still highly recommend Black Orpheus. I mean, look at this. Look at this and tell me it isn't the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Last on the list, but certainly not least, is Joe Dante's completely wonderful and vastly underrated Matinee. As I said there would be on this list, this one is technically a cheat since it's set in October of 1962, but I don't know, there's just something about this movie that reminds me of the summertime, so whatever. If you were to make a list of the best films about filmmaking, this is far and away my personal favorite. Yes, 8.5 is great, Day for Night is excellent, Cinema Paradiso is just plain lovely, but Matinee just has a special place in my heart and mind. A while ago, I made a video about smell-o-vision and the other gloriously silly gimmicks that were employed in the 1950s and 60s, and one of the filmmakers I talked about was the great William Castle, inventor of Percepto, Emergo, Illusiono, and a bunch of other cornball gimmicks that I unashamedly think are kind of amazing.
What are these things for?
It's a release form. It says it's not our fault if the movie scares you to death.
Wow.
It's not a joke. We've had 10-year-old kids having heart attacks at this movie. They're recovering, but we can't be exposed legally. Now, if you don't sign...
But we're not scared. Are we, Dennis?
No.
Here in Matinee, John Goodman plays Schlockmeister director Lawrence Woolsey, entirely inspired by Castle.
These are a little surprise for the audience, rigged to the seat cushion. Feel that. Giving it to the people right where they need it the most.
Gotcha.
Woolsey rolls into Key West for the premiere of his newest monster movie, the giant ant film Mant. But just so happens to do so as the Cuban Missile Crisis sends the town into complete disarray. Matinee was released in 1993, just a couple of years after Joe Dante directed Gremlins 2.
I can't believe this. I mean, this is worse than the first one.
We just show these movies, madam. We don't make them.
And like Gremlins 2, this one just didn't do much business at all at the box office, which is entirely a shame because I'd argue that this period was the height of Dante's career when he was firing on all cylinders. I think I'd probably say that Matinee and Gremlins 2 are my two favorite of all of his films.
Here I am. What have you got for me?
There's something so genuine about his movies, Matinee in particular. It's got the vibe of an Amblin film or one of Joe Johnston's early films like The Rocketeer. It's this affectionate, loving look at a period of American history long since gone. And it has a kind of wide-eyed, childlike sense of wonder that just simply oozes off the screen. Sure, it may initially come across somewhat corny, but long before the end, I think it completely deserves that schmaltzy mawkishness.
You see what he's putting back? The showmanship. This, to my mind, is what's been missing.
And there you have it. Those are the 6 films I'm assigning for your summer semester. If you're interested, I've got links in the description box below where you can rent each and every one of them. If you end up watching any or all of them, let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'd love to read them. Also, let me know any glorious summer films you think I left out, because these were only 6 and there are so many good ones out there. Thanks for watching, everyone. Very special thanks to Raycon for sponsoring this video. If you don't know, Raycon's wireless earbuds not only start at about half the price of any other premium wireless earbuds in the market, but they sound just as amazing as other top audio brands you know. Their newest model, the Everyday E25 earbuds, are their best model yet, with 6 hours of playtime, seamless Bluetooth pairing, and an overall more compact design that gives you a wonderful fit. On days when I'm animating for hours and hours on end, I pretty much listen to a non-stop stream of podcasts and YouTube videos. And having their wireless earbuds not only eliminates unnecessary wires and cables, but overall helps make my editing process all the more relaxed and enjoyable. And right now they're offering a great deal. You can go to buyraycon.com/royalocean for 15% off of your order.